Hello, everyone, and welcome to another special edition of Sports Talk with Tonsoni. I'm your host, Brian Tonsoni, and today we are continuing our interviews of journalists as they help our students at Delphi Community High School. And today I have with me a very special guest from Bloomington, Indiana, Ken Bikoff. He is a communications specialist with the IU School of Informatics, Computing, and Engineering. He's also a host of the Pigs podcast, and he has been involved in journalism for over 20 years at a variety of sources, mainly covering lately the Indiana Hoosiers. Ken, how are you doing this evening?
I'm doing really good. Yeah, it's been a labor of love to say the least, but yeah, it's been this will be my 14th football season, which is really, really hard to believe, but I've seen a little bit of everything here.
And I've had the pleasure of meeting Ken down in Bloomington, stopped by the podcast or stopped the tailgate a few times, and we've gotten to know each other. Outstanding person as well as a journalist. And Ken, we're starting this new website and trying to encourage writing for our students. What would you say would be the number one suggestion for anyone starting out in the sports journalism field?
Stay true to yourself. That's the thing that I always tell people: be honest, because when you aren't honest, it creates problems. I'll give you an example. There is a guy that was a famous sports writer in Chicago, and this is back when I was working at Basketball News and Pro Football Weekly. Yao Ming was going through the NBA draft. And we went and saw a workout with his from Loyola, Chicago, is where they had his individual combine. And so everybody's there, and Yao Ming was really, really impressive. And after it was over, all of the media is leaving, and I heard the guy who was walking in front of me down a flight of stairs, and I heard him say, "I was really impressive. People expect me to rip him, so I'm going to. But you know, he was really impressive." And the next day, sure enough, the guy's column just said Yao Ming's going to be a complete bust. Well, 6 months later, you know, the guy's an all-star and a deserving all-star, and this guy had to write a column just saying, I was wrong about him. Now, he wasn't actually wrong about him. He just wrote expecting, trying to feed what he believed his readers expected him to say. And it was a perfect example of just be true to yourself, and you're never going to have to go back and you know, do that kind of thing. It to pander to readers, I feel, always comes through and always comes back to bite you. So if you're going to be a writer, if you're going to cover something, be true to yourself. Write what you see, and you'll be able to defend yourself a lot easier going forward if you're questioned on it. And it's just easier to just come from a place of honesty. That honesty always comes through.
Ken, when you're selecting a story, is it something that you're interested in writing or you think would garner a lot of attention from readers? Or is it a combination of both when you select stories?
It's a combination of both to a certain extent. I prefer to do stories that I think that I would like to read and that are interesting to me. I really have a problem when you have guys who want to do a story because everybody else is talking about it, so we have to do a story as well. My attitude on that is, unless you have your own angle on it, all you're doing is regurgitating the same idea, and are you actually moving the discussion forward? Are you bringing anything new to your readers or something that they haven't heard before? And that, to me, is one of the challenges that you run into when you're covering things. Is like, for instance, right now, Indiana's football situation at quarterback, everybody wants to write about the quarterbacks, and it's a big story. There's no question. But as a reader, do you want to read a fourth or fifth story about the quarterback position, or do you want to read something about what is making one guy stand out, or what is the strengths and weaknesses of one guy, or what's kind of the background and feel for how the guy gets along with his teammates, or how he's leading things in the quarterback room? What's he like in terms of just his leadership? Not necessarily what kind of throws he's making, not necessarily his grasp of the offense, because everyone's going to have that story. You want to go for stories that will be interesting to your readers and also will be unique. Otherwise, if it's just a story that they can get anywhere else, they'll go anywhere else. But if you bring your own perspective and your own angle to it that's unique from what the other people are doing, I think that draws more eyes.
Do you think that leads to more feature stories, special interest stories, rather than positional previews, offense, defense previews, game reports, or can that vary?
Yeah, no, it can. And all of those things, the position, the game previews, those are important, but they're not unique. And I think that those are things that people do, and they can be interesting, but no question, the way I've always approached all of this is everybody who goes through life, it doesn't have to be even at, with athletics. There's a story for why they are where they are. And your job as a journalist, especially when it comes to feature writing, is to bring that story to your readers. Why is this person here? What are they facing in their lives? What are they looking forward to? What are their goals? What are their concerns? All of that is stuff that you bring. And to me, that's the kind of writing that's not only the most interesting and most fun, but it's also the kind of thing that readers can engage with. Because if you can give somebody a window into another person's life, a player's life, it really helps them maybe connect with the player or the person, or maybe they could relate on a personal level to what somebody's going through. I think that not only does that grab a reader and keep them interested longer, but maybe they'll also start keeping track of what you're writing, because, again, all of this, instead of just being the regular stuff that's put out, you bring your own unique storytelling to it, and the impact of that story will go far beyond just that day's copy, and it can lead to more of a reader-writer relationship going forward.
You mentioned just now unique storytelling. When you're writing an article, do you have a style that's particularly yours? Does it change with the subject? And what kind of things should our writers look at to maintain that interest in a story from the start to the finish?
Well, I mean, I've always, my style has changed over the years. It used to be once upon a time that I liked to really start out in left field and then bring it down to the main point. And I'll still do that on columns on occasion with that. But to me, what I want it to be is like you're just sitting with somebody, at a bar or a picnic or wherever, and they start telling you a story. And there's other kinds of writing. A game story, you don't want to have a conversational tone to it because it's a different kind of writing. But with features especially, you do really want to tell the story as if the person is across from you and you're just talking to them. And I think that conversational style, I think, resonates with people, that they find it easier to read, and they will stick with it longer if you're telling a good story. The other thing too is, especially in the newspaper business, they'll tell you to do X number of inches on a guide. I never really liked writing to fill for and whether it's magazine or newspaper or anywhere. I really like just letting the story be the story. If the story, it needs to be 1,000 words long, so be it. It needs to be 2,400 words, so be it. As long as you're not trying to reach a number, let the story tell you how long the story is going to be. And it just will always come through, because there won't be padding. There won't be, a bunch of fluff to it. The story and that's something that has to develop over time for writers. But, that conversational tone and just letting the story take you where it will, I think, again, really comes through to the readers.
We're talking with Ken Bikoff from Indiana University about some journalism tips. Ken, talk about the importance of sources and maintaining a journalistic integrity when discussing and quoting sources for your work.
Well, to me, if you say, there are some people that will say, well, nothing is off the record. And I wholeheartedly disagree with that. I will say that if you say that something is going to be off the record, keep it off the record, because one slip up, one mistake, and your reputation will be ruined. And you might think that it's only going to ruin it with that one person, and that's not the case. I know for a fact that when there are coaching changes at IU, not everybody gets a clean slate. I mean, it's a thing of the people who are still around will say, watch that guy because he doesn't always, keep his promises and things like that. Now, by that same token, you have to understand that the people that you're talking to, they are not your friend. And they are sources. Now, they might be friendly with you, but there's a difference between being friendly with somebody and them being your friend. So you don't necessarily, you are a journalist, and so your job is not to protect them, it is to bring the story. When you're dealing with sports, I think it's a little bit more relaxed because you are not dealing with nuclear secrets. You are dealing with kids' games. And I think people do forget that at times. But when you're dealing with sources, if you cross a source, not only is it going to affect your relationship with that person, but it can spread. And once your reputation is sullied by that, it's tough, if not impossible, to get back. So all you have to do is, make it clear, that if you're going to report something, don't ambush a person with it, and just print it. You could go to them and say, hey, do you want to back this up? And then they could say yes, they could say no, whatever it is. You stand by what you think is journalistically correct. But if you at least gave them the heads up that you're going to be reporting this, and that doesn't obviously work in every situation, but at least you contacted them and you gave them the opportunity to respond before you did what you had to do. It's a delicate relationship, to say the least, and sometimes they could change over time. There was a coach here at Indiana that I got along with really well early on in his tenure, and later on, he basically wouldn't speak to me. So, that changes over time. But ultimately, your job is to bring the story to the reader, not to protect the person, not to protect the university. If you are a journalist, your job is to bring the story to the reader, and that delicate balance, that little dance that you do with sources, can be, it can be trying at times, but it's also something you ultimately have to come back down to your integrity, and you have to be able to look yourself in the mirror and know you did the right thing. I think that's a big, important part of it.
A writer has to know what they're talking about in order to tell a good story. Any research tips, and also on that, what makes a really good question for your sources or post-game interviews?
Well, nothing just irritates me more than a question that is that just comes out, talk about this, that, or the other. Ask your question. Don't ask them to talk about it. Ask your question. What do you want to find out? And it's a verbal tip for some reporters. It's a crutch. But when you're asking a question, again, part of this is experience. You learn over time. How is somebody going to respond to this? So you have to play a little psychological game with some people sometimes. And you'll find that coaches, especially in athletics, coaches, they want to talk about certain things, even though they'll say, we don't have any comment on that, we're not going to talk about that. Sometimes they want to talk about it, but they want it to be their idea. So there was one time that a guy wasn't going to be able to play at IU, and I knew the coach, if you just asked him about the guy, he wasn't going to talk about him. But you could tell that he wanted to talk about the situation. So what I did was I asked how his plans changed now that guy wasn't going to be available. He ended up talking about the guy and his situation and, a little bit about how the plans were going to change. But coaches weirdly don't like to be questioned. I don't know that anybody does. And certainly most coaches out there will look at the journalist as knowing less than they do about whatever subject. And you want to know something? They're right. Because journalists don't get paid to study things 24/7 and know every nuance of an offense, a defense. It's just not part of it. So they don't like to be questioned. So you have to kind of question them in a way that will make it seem like it's their idea that they're talking about what they're talking about. It's a mind game for sure, but it's one that comes up certainly time and time again, and that's what I think is really important in just how you go about questioning people. Is that is just the key is to have them talk, make it kind of their idea.
Is it difficult to separate the fan from your journalistic work with the idea that as I'm studying journalism, you're not supposed to technically be a fan of the team you're covering? But I think at some point that might become hard or more difficult when you're following the team, you live in the town, those things. Is that a difficult separation?
It can be. You betcha. In 2007, Coach Hefner died, and Indiana's playing, all season for help. You get to the bucket game, they kick a field goal to win it. I'm an IU alum. I mean, they're going back to a bowl for the first time in 14 years, and I was in the team room afterwards, and I still felt myself physically shaking because I was excited for him. I knew what it meant to the program. I knew what it meant to everybody around IU. And yet, by that same token, in the press box, you watch it and you just have to swallow it. And it's not easy. Same thing when Watford hit the watch shot. That was a big, it was big for the program. You knew the players well. You knew it was important to them. You knew what it meant to the community. And yet, you couldn't really react. Because again, you're a journalist, you have to be a professional, and so inwardly you might be going crazy. You might be excited, you might be angry, you might be whatever. It's just you have to keep that under wraps and pull that emotion out. Later on, go nuts. That's fine. But in full view of the public, in what you write, you have to be honest. You have to be fair, and even if it means that it's not. Even if you don't feel, you wish you could go crazy, you wish you could cheer on that. Again, you have to recognize you're a professional and you have to separate yourself from that. And when you're covering it, it really can't be a thing of you're rooting for somebody one way or another. Even if you physically feel it, you're a person, you're feeling it. You still have to be able to detach yourself a little bit.
So at Delphi Bracketology, we focus on the bracketology aspect, but we've also done some game day videos. And we recently got credentials to the Purdue Northwestern game 1 on Thursday. I'm taking a fellow faculty member, and then we're going to start taking students. So how can I get some tips on what it's like to work in a press box and things that I should know as we teach our young men and women how to be journalists at a sporting event?
Well, first and foremost, don't hesitate to talk to other people who are working there and tell them why you're there. Because there has never been an instance in all my time in all the press boxes I've been in where somebody has been new and they've asked a question and they've gotten a bad response for it. We know that because everybody remembers their first day as well. And it's important for people to recognize that they have that opportunity to mentor somebody. Don't be afraid to go up to journalists. Make sure they're not in the middle of something, but go up to them and introduce yourself and say, hey, I'm whoever. This is why I'm here. I wanted to just chat you up. I've never once seen somebody say, go away. It might be, hey, can I talk to you in a few minutes? That could be the case. Be sure there's no cheering in the press box. That's a real thing. No cheering in the press box. You want to stay professional. You want to watch the games. And I'll admit, the Indiana press box is not necessarily always the quietest place around. But other press boxes are different. You do just want to make sure that you're respectful of other people. They're working. They're not there just to watch the game. They're there to analyze the game and to just try to figure out what's going on and how to best report that. So it's just basically a matter of, if it's your first game, talk to people, make sure you take in, see what other people are, how other people handle it, and I think that will go a long way.
We're talking with Ken Bikoff from Indiana University. He's been very gracious with his time. Podcasting, I've started to do some on my own as a hobby. You do some for pigs.com, and you've also done some radio in the past. What's different about podcasting, and what's, I guess, the number one thing that someone trying to record a podcast needs to be aware of?
Well, I've always approached it because of my background in radio and I've done television. I always try to approach that podcast as if it were a radio broadcast. It's the same thing. So I know there are different attitudes on podcasting where people could be looser. They could talk about things that are off subject and all that. I generally don't do that. Just because, what I said earlier, I'm staying true to myself. And I know that this is the way that I want to go about doing it, and I'm not going to do what everybody else does. And that also means that I'm not covering the same subject matter that everybody else does. I might throw in something about IU history. I might be talking about, something that's completely different than what everybody else is. But to me, I don't want to talk about the same thing as everybody else, because then what makes me unique? So you want to be able to do that. The quality of the recording, I think, is really important. It's something that can get overlooked at times. Get a decent microphone. They're not expensive. You could spend $30-$50. The one that I use a lot after basketball games is one that I bought for $100 that plugs into my phone, and it's a fantastic microphone. There are a lot of different ways that you can go about things, but if you sound like you are an amateur, people are going to look at you like you're an amateur. And so if you sound professional, people are going to put a little more stock into you. We could debate whether that's fair or not, but that is the case. And so you want to try to present yourself as professionally as possible, unless the tone of your podcast is one of just two guys on a couch. That's fine if that's what your thing is. If you want to be professional, you want to be a broadcaster, you want to present it as if it's a professional broadcast, then you have to act accordingly. And I think that that line can get blurred at times. There's nothing wrong with having fun. There's nothing wrong with talking about some things that are off topic. But I know the podcasting, I'm old school, so I always just want it to be kind of a professional sounding broadcast, and something that people could imagine that is being done in a studio, even if it's not.
Ken, you're absolutely right on that. In my short time in the last year, sound quality has been my number one challenge and my number one improvement, from podcast one to better mics to stuff on the computer. I think that is absolutely true, and it's a quest of mine to keep finding better quality. Ken, last question. What do you think is the number one mistake that young writers, young sports journalists make that we can share with our students in hopes that they're at least aware of it and watching for it? Well, I think we might have lost Ken, and we will call that a show. I thank you for listening. This has been another edition of Sports. Oh, Ken said to call him back. So give me 2 seconds here so I can call him back, and we'll get back on here. I have to input it into the computer. Thank you for your patience.
Hello.
Ken, Brian Tonsoni, we got disconnected there for a little bit. I was just getting ready to ask a final question. What do you think is the major mistake that young writers, young journalists make when they first start writing, so that we might be able to share it with our young writers and that they can at least be aware to look for a common mistake?
Well, I think that the most common mistake is trying to be something you're not, or trying to imitate somebody else. Everybody has their own style. Everybody has their own way of approaching things. There's no question that things that you've read growing up, things that you've watched growing up, things that you've listened to growing up are going to influence you. And so influencing you influences are fine. It's imitation, I think, that is a problem. And so, you don't have to try to make a name for yourself by screaming the loudest. You don't have to try to make a name for yourself by saying the craziest thing, unless that's what you really believe. And so don't try to imitate others. Try to just be yourself and just go about your business the way you feel is right. Don't try to do it the way other people do it. Otherwise, that will shine through. It's clear as a bell to a listener, a reader, a watcher, anything. They're going to notice if you're trying to be somebody else. Just be you. Just your personality is what drove you to this place. That doesn't mean you should be just like somebody else. It's important to just be yourself. And the other thing that I think is a big mistake is just, it sounds weird, but just not knowing what you're talking about. And that means that you do the research, not just on a story, but especially in the world of athletics. If you are covering football, know football. Know what a cover 2 is. Know what a 3 technique does. Be able to look at a defense from above in a press box and know what they're doing. And if you don't know, talk to coaches. Talk to the players. Talk to them, even if it's on the side or it's out of season. Talk to them about what they're doing so that you know what you're talking about, and they'll respect you more for asking those kinds of questions. There's a ton of information on the internet that can give you the basics, and then when you're covering a team, you actually talk to the coaches. There was one coach at IU. I asked him to watch some football tape with him just so that I could see what he's trying to get done. This was during the offseason. It was in May. And he told me he had never had a journalist ask him if he could do that, if he could just watch tape, not for a story, not for anything, just to help him be better at his job. And we did it on a couple of different years so that when I went back to cover the team, I knew what concepts they were trying before, so that if somebody made a mistake, you could say, everybody looks at it. If a guy gets beat deep, you could see that the cornerback is chasing him. So a lot of people assume the cornerback was the one who made the mistake. But that's not necessarily the case. Maybe the linebacker was supposed to be over there. Maybe the safety was supposed to be over there. And so when you are wrong when you're writing about blaming somebody for making a mistake or not knowing who is supposed to be where they are, it hurts your credibility, and it might allow you to just gain the respect of coaches and of players and help you do your job ultimately better, because you know what you're talking about. And if you know what you're talking about, it always comes through in your work.
Ken, thank you very much for taking your time on a Monday evening to help some kids you've never met, and that speaks volumes for you. I appreciate your time.
Well, again, everyone's been there. Everybody's got to start somewhere, and I just wish everybody the best of luck.
Thanks, Ken. That'll do it for this special edition of Sports Talk with Tonsoni. For Ken Bikoff, I'm Brian Tonsoni. So long.